A 5,000-year-old Siberian rock carving depicts a man from the Stone Age attempting to have sex with an elk while on skis. There were many connotations and symbols of sexuality in ancient Slavic paganism. It was thought that sexuality was a universal cosmic force. There were many orgiastic festivals and overtly sexual rites where men and women bathed together in their underwear, with the males metaphorically fertilizing the ground and the ladies displaying their genitalia to the sky to beg for rain. Some devilish, pagan sex practices persisted among northern Russian peasants until the end of the 19th century, despite church efforts to abolish them. The Christianization of Russia in the 9th century brought a new sexual philosophy to the country, which was gradual and fleeting. The Russian Orthodox Church had to adapt to regional and ethnic diversity regarding traditional sexual behaviors and was more practical in matters like clerical celibacy. Total abstinence from all sexual relations, even marriage, was recognized in official circles as a holy deed. However, married couples were generally authorized to engage in sexual activity.
The Church focused more on issues of verbalization and social representation, leading to a clash between the strong spiritualism and otherworldly asceticism of the official, high, culture and the naturalistic pagan views towards sexuality in the low, everyday peasant culture. In the lives of peasants, modesty and privacy had no place, and the nude body was common. In the 16th and 17th centuries, European visitors were amazed to discover that Russian community bathhouses were where men and women frequently showered together. Sexually explicit art began to appear in Russia in the middle of the 18th century, influenced by the French libertines. The nobility in Russia read largely foreign pornographic books and made love to women. The Church held great power in Russia due to its strong ties to the government, and Russian censorship was more widespread and severe than that of Western nations.
A unique element that has had a significant impact on sexuality in Russia in addition to religion is a left-wing radical revolutionary democratic literary critique from the 19th century. Early in the 19th century, young aristocrats were sent to respectable secular homes and received an excellent education. They attempted to disassociate themselves from official discrimination and were not scared of their sexual experiences and sensations, regardless of their moral and religious beliefs. The most well-known poet in Russia, Alexander Pushkin, produced very sophisticated and clever sensual poetry. Such freedom was unattainable for the following generation of Russian intellectuals, many of whom had previously attended seminaries and were descended mostly from clerical families. They were able to reject some of their parents' beliefs and ideals, but not all of them. Their ongoing internal struggles with their nonconformist sexual behaviors and emotions, especially self-indulgence and homoeroticism, became an international moral and artistic rejection and repudiation of hedonism and sexuality as vile, harmful, and undeserving. Moral justification was limited to overarching social goals like the liberation of the oppressed and impoverished. Everything personal or private was seen as arrogant and secondary. These anti-hedonistic, anti-sexual sentiments have assimilated into a distinct ideological movement in Russian society. It was a moral manifestation of the middle-class bourgeois antagonism to aristocratic individuality, just as it was in the West. But this opposition took on a more radical form in Russia. Politically inappropriate, vulgar, and unattractive, sensuality was rejected by populists, while religious bigots denounced it as godless and immoral.
Any writer or artist who ventured up that slippery slope was met with instant criticism from both the left and the right. This has had a major negative impact on the emergence and growth of a high, sophisticated erotic language and art, without which sexual conversation will always seem vulgar, filthy, and base. In general, Russian classical literature tends to discourage sensuality and sexuality. Seldom is sex portrayed as a source of joy, but more often as a tragedy or a quasi-religious epiphany. The Russian cultural environment started to shift on the cusp of the 20th century. The Kreutzer Sonata by Leo Tolstoy, 1891, sparked a philosophical debate among Russian writers and philosophers, including Vladimir Solovyev, Nikolai Berdyaev, and Vasily Rozanov, regarding the nature and relationships of erotica, sex, marriage, and love. These metaphysics of sexuality left no room for actual, regular, everyday sexual pleasure, even as it attempted, on paper, to restore eroticism. Although Russia produced sophisticated erotic literature and art in the early 20th century, the goal of those artists was to legitimize eroticism rather than to depict sexual pleasure. Only a few notable exceptions, such as the painters Konstantin Somov and Mikhail Kuzmin, support this overall trend. Russian erotic art from the early 20th century was marginalized by both the official and popular cultures, regardless of its aesthetic and moral significance. It was viewed as decadent, and both the left and the right vigorously condemned it.
One of Russia's greatest rulers, Catherine the Great, held power from 1762 to 1796, leaving her mark on history. She once said, "My misfortune is that my heart cannot be happy, even for an hour, without love." It is said that she entirely dedicated herself to her lovers, whom she revered. There were 10 to 20 official lovers for Catherine. However, despite the perception that she saw them as nothing more than boy toys, she had relationships with them that lasted anywhere from a year to 12 years. Besides Grigory Orlov, Stanislaw Poniatowski, whom she elevated to the position of King of Poland before abandoning him, Gregory Potemkin, and Alexandra Lanskoy were among Catherine's admirers. Potemkin was Catherine's prime minister and close advisor, aiding her in her coup. In addition to negotiating the conquest of the Crimea, reorganizing the army, constructing roads, establishing universities, and setting up pseudo-Potemkin villages, purported facade villages put up to dazzle Catherine during a tour of the region, he is mainly remembered for them. Catherine the Great's advisor on literature, art collector, military strategist, diplomat, and lover was Prince Grigory Alexandrovich Potemkin. In addition to villages, he named battleships and movies. Although it is said that Potemkin and Catherine were only lovers for 2 years, they remained close confidants until her passing. He was supposedly her pimp, bringing her a string of young suitors. She, for her part, disregarded his incestuous bond with his nieces. Catherine had selected the youngest and most attractive of these nieces to be her son's future bride, but her plans were derailed when the 15-year-old niece became pregnant through her uncle.
"My happiness is gone," Catherine wrote to a friend when Lanskoy unexpectedly passed away from diphtheria. "I've considered taking my own life. My once pleasant room has now turned into an abandoned cave, into which I drag myself like a ghost. I can't look at anyone without crying myself to tears. I am unable to eat or sleep. I get bored reading, and I get tired of writing." According to reports, Catherine had a voracious desire for sex, recommended having sex 6 times a day, and claimed that sex helped her sleep at night. It was reported that Catherine dreamed of having sex with her horse. According to reports, she had a special harness made. Many of the allegations regarding her romantic life seemed to be an attempt to discredit her by competitors. Some critics dubbed Catherine Messalina of the North, evoking the name of the renowned Roman nymphomaniac and Claudius's wife. It is reported that Catherine would frequently entice suitors from the imperial guard and house them in an imperial aide-de-camp assigned to her bedroom. Before spending the night with them, she had them undergo physical examinations by her physicians and put them through a battery of performance assessments given by MME Protasov and the Countess Bruce. Sometimes Catherine would choose a potential partner after watching them in action.
During the Soviet era, sex was strictly prohibited by the government, with anything erotic, particularly non-traditional, being banned. Soviet psychology was outdated and misapplied, and sexuality was considered a fundamental human quality. The October Revolution of 1917 broke free conventions around sexuality, and it was no longer a taboo topic. However, sexual anarchy, increased unintended pregnancies, births, STDs, rape, and prostitution were the first tangible effects. The Soviet government funded basic sex education and some sociological, biological, and anthropological sex research in the 1920s. However, the egotistical, snobbish, and decadent sexual art was at odds with the new revolutionary mindset, and sexuality was seen as a barrier and diversion from the socialist revolution's objectives. Erotica was viewed as ethically and socially rebellious as early as the 1920s, with sexual selection following a class revolutionary proletarian consciousness. Totalitarian governmental control over personality has never been consistent with freedom and enjoyment of sexuality. The Soviet Union had a history of sexually oppressing its citizens, but the methods of justification and phrasing used in this suppression were altered. Communist views on sexuality were always negative and placed a strong emphasis on the necessity of external, stringent societal control. The Soviet authorities were unable to completely eradicate sexuality, but the overall effect of this sexophobia was the eradication of all forms of erotic culture and the outlawing of sexual discourse in fields such as medical information, erotic art, and sex research.
Following the fall of the Soviet Union, sexual content in Russian media and television shifted significantly based on age, sex, area, and educational attainment. In the 1990s, Russian sexual ideals and views progressed toward liberalization and autonomy. The 1970s saw a slow resurgence of Russian sexual art, literature, and theater, with Western novels with sensual themes becoming easier to access. Relaxed erotic literature regulations in 1992 led to a flood of pornographic and erotic content. In 1995, a compilation of sexual folklore for children was created, and erotic film festivals and photographic shows began to take place. However, this change has led to instances of unnecessary or cruel sex and the arbitrary introduction of nudity, particularly in literature and movies. Russian commentators are concerned that a similar flood of sex and violence in Russian society will follow the unleashing of long-repressed sexual expression in art. Late-night soft porn is now common on exotic French networks and the Playboy channel.
In 1996, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, the head of Russia's nationalist neo-fascist party, was criticized for his sexual behavior during his presidential campaign. He claimed that Gorbachev should have stayed in bed with Racer instead of entering politics. Zhirinovsky boasts of having slept with over 200 women and believes having children would solve the low population rate. He declared that women support him when they are sexually active, and women going through menopause cast their votes for Yeltsin. During an interview with Playboy magazine, Zhirinovsky begged Jennifer Gould to have sex with him and his bodyguards. He suggested that undressing would help understand each other better and that group sex would work best in a group setting. However, his offer was rejected, and Zhirinovsky criticized Gould for being selfish.
In 1997, a film published by a Russian tabloid showed Russia's Minister of Justice engaging in nude sexual relations with women in a sauna frequented by gangsters. This invasion of privacy infuriated the Russian people more than any misconduct by the nation's top lawyer. Prosecutor Yuri Skaratov was also seen having sex with two prostitutes in a grainy film taken in March 1999. Many Russians view Americans as sexually repressed, with some respecting Bill Clinton for his manliness and being surprised by the attention given to Monica Lewinsky's issue. Sexual behavior in Russia and other former Soviet republics varies greatly, with no set definition of normal sexual orientation. Marriage is the primary venue for sexual expression, and public sources expose citizens to sexual images and information. Parents' responses to these images and their impact on their children's sexual development vary, with some discouraging expressions, others focusing on proper behavior, and others supporting sex education initiatives.
And now let's talk about the most attractive and, of course, the most frightening aspects of the sex life of Russians. KGB intelligence on sexual affairs. The Romeo method, which involved sending attractive Soviet men to the West with fictitious documents to entice female secretaries who had access to material that the communists desired, was a favorite tactic used by the KGB. In an attempt to obtain intelligence or extort money, the KGB also attempted to woo enemy men by using both female and even male operatives. It was known as the honey trap. Raspberries are brothels that were set up to trick Westerners. One of the world's most advanced special services, which taught female spies how to woo men, was founded by the USSR. They showed them obscene pornography and taught the girls sexual skills in an attempt to spare them from humiliation or shame. It was expected of girls to be capable of anything. One of the practical sessions was the lesbian orgy, in which the teachers also participated. The entire event was recorded, and the participants subsequently had a detailed discussion about the video. They were informed that your body is your weapon as a soldier. After training, they would develop into sexually attuned ladies, willing to have sex with any guy upon request. They were presented to the target of the blackmail, and to keep everyone safe, they had to find out what his sexual tastes were.
It should have been entirely fortuitous that they made the first contact, followed by an intense connection that naturally ended in blackmail since he had to work with Soviet intelligence. But occasionally, surprises also occurred, as in the instance of the infamous seduction of Indonesian President Ahmed Sukarno. His enthusiasm for sex was well known. For that reason, when he was in Moscow, the KGB brought him a bunch of young girls. These girls met Ahmed Sukarno on a plane while posing as air hostesses. He then invited them to his Moscow hotel room and planned a lavish orgy. 2 candid cameras mounted behind mirrors captured the image. The surgery appeared to be flawless. Sukarno was invited to a small private movie theater by the KGB, where they showed him the pornographic tape in which he was the lead actor before they began the blackmail. The KGB was expecting him to get scared and agree to work with them immediately, but it was the other way around. Sukarno thought it was a gift from the Soviet Union and requested more copies so he could bring them back to Indonesia and screen them in theaters. Sukarno told the shocked agents that if the Indonesian people saw him acting naughtily toward Russian girls, they would be extremely proud of him. Additionally, East German intelligence made advancements in the area of sexual espionage. They devised a scheme to woo solitary secretaries employed in prominent governmental establishments in West Berlin. It was intended for the first interaction to occur at a bus stop, in a cafe, or during a lunch break. There was a game of seduction after a guy struck up a discussion. For instance, when a dapper, well-groomed man appears to have knocked on the wrong door after ringing a lonely woman's bell.
The affair begins when he graciously apologizes and gives her flowers. Before beginning any of the activities, agents were well aware of those women. But a male sex spy wasn't expected to look like a movie star. If he showed interest in a lady who was unimpressive, that would raise suspicions. Seductive female lecturers taught education lessons to male spies as well. Occasionally, an agent may develop feelings for his target, at which point neither of them can be controlled. Because of the severe loneliness among the secretaries employed by West Berlin's secret organizations, NATO authorities had the secretaries place posters on the walls of their offices, warning them not to open their hearts. Intelligence agencies from different nations have also employed homosexual operatives. However, this is contingent upon the nation from which the item originated and their stance on non-traditional sexual behavior. An incident occurred when a KGB agent saw that a man from government security was being watched by one of the French diplomats. The French representative laughed aloud when the KGB showed him sexy pictures of himself because it turned out that everyone in the embassy was aware of his sexual orientation and it was not at all problematic.
Unfortunately, there are many stories of romantic espionage and abuse of other people's feelings all over the world. But what is the view of ordinary people of today's Russian society on sex and intimacy? The elder generations are the ones who are most opposed to the movement towards sexual emancipation. Younger and more educated Russians tend to agree, according to studies, that new businesses offering high-end apparel, cosmetics, and health goods cater to a growing public interest in the attractive exhibition of the human body. The new Russian youth culture and its implied uniqueness contrast sharply with the rigid rules of grooming and attire that were in place during the Soviet era. For example, shorts were not considered appropriate until the 1980s in Russia. 3 facts are important for understanding the specific features of Russian eros. First, compared to the West, Russia had a much bigger difference between the official high culture and the common people's low everyday culture. While the low culture of the common people gave sexuality a positive value shared by all medieval European Christian cultures, the official high culture was sanctified by the church and anti-sexual by nature. Second, Russia was a much later adopter of sophisticated, intricate sexual art than the West. The only way that sexuality might be included in high culture at all is through the medium of erotic art. Third, rather than being directly linked to civil society, the emergence of civilized forms of daily social life in Russia was more strongly linked to governmental power. Political authorities frequently introduced new norms of propriety, which put more pressure on everyday conduct to become uniform rather than individualistic and diverse. Normative pluralism, which includes sexual tolerance, cannot exist without some established and reasonably diverse subcultures. These 3 elements are related historically and practically.
Insufficient privacy. Russian perspectives on personal hygiene and health functions. Young couples are now compelled to share intimate moments and make love in parks and forests due to a lack of privacy and crowded apartments. This is all well and good in the summer, but what do they do in the winter? The bear eats in the summer and sucks his paw in the winter. Dreaming of summer is a Russian proverb. Russian couples dream about the woods in the winter. The Russian people's historically conservative views on body functions and nudity have also influenced their sexuality. The wearing of any kind of shorts in public, including at beach resorts, was controversial 30 years ago. In the Western regions, walking shorts are no longer forbidden. Muslims in the Eastern republics have much more conservative views. Muslim women are still not allowed to expose their bodies, and breaking this taboo can have dire consequences. Even for guys, shorts are frowned upon in some parts.
In Russian culture, bodily functions are not publicly acknowledged. It is considered impolite to mention the need for a restroom directly. Russians will either quietly leave a meeting or social event or, at most, only say they're going to walk in a certain way. Even adolescent couples who are well acquainted with one another frequently invent make-believe justifications for their absences to use the restroom. The appalling condition of the nation's plumbing system could also be a factor in the avoidance of overt discussions of physiological processes. The public lavatories in Russian society after the revolution of 1991 are part of the overall breakdown of material commodities and services. They are no longer free and frequently soiled or broken. Wash basins can just provide a trickle of cold water, or they could remain empty. Since toilet tissue is hard to come by, cardboard, discarded office paper, newspaper pages, and magazine pages can all be utilized as alternatives. Even if a lot of people care about cleanliness, physical inhibitions and a lack of resources have conspired to endanger their general health, making personal hygiene challenging. Despite a lengthy history of supposed government commitment, interest in increasing physical fitness through better food and exercise is only getting started. The impact of these variables on everyday life and sexuality is further compounded by the severe historical censorship, the lack of material resources in the present, and the ambivalence of the Russian people toward nakedness, bodily functions, intimate hygiene, and sexuality.
Following the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia made several legal changes that strengthened LGBTQ rights, but their legacy has largely been undone during Vladimir Putin's leadership. These changes included the legalization of homosexuality in 1993, equal age of consent and punishments for crimes, and repealing the ban on gay men donating blood in 2008. Transgender rights were also made possible in 1997, but there have been no further improvements since then. Since 2020, same-sex unions have been banned by the Russian constitution, making Russia a notorious promoter of traditional values and a denier of gender norms and LGBTQ rights. In December 2022, President Vladimir Putin signed an anti-LGBTQ law banning propaganda of non-traditional sexual relations to all age groups. This legislation is the result of Russia's conservative turn in the 21st century, which emphasizes the interests of the state, respect for authority, religion, patriotism, Russia's unique traditions and values, and heteronormative notions of gender and sexuality. The Russian political elite and state-controlled media have adopted a narrative of the West using LGBTQ rights as a tool to undermine and destabilize the country. Nikolai Patrushev, Secretary of the Security Council, has warned that the West is aggressively imposing neoliberal values such as same-sex marriage on other countries to blur traditions, faith, and historical generational memory.
Russia's conservatism has become a geopolitical agenda built on enmity towards the West, as seen in its aggression in Ukraine. Putin has justified Russia's military actions by citing the need to defend the country from degradation caused by the West. The Kremlin's hostility towards the West is intertwined with increasing authoritarianism, manifesting in strengthening repression and limitations of political freedoms. The foreign agent law has become a powerful instrument of repression at the disposal of the Russian government, excluding anyone under foreign influence and whose activities contradict Russia's national interests. Defenders of LGBTQ rights are among the most frequently included on the list of foreign agents, complicating their work and stigmatizing them in the public eye. Putin's conservative authoritarianism has had a heavy impact on the current socio-political climate in the country, facilitating censorship of LGBTQ themes, bans of LGBTQ events, and state-endorsed public homophobia. The Russian authorities have consistently banned pride parades, refused to register LGBTQ organizations, and issued homophobic statements. The Kremlin's conservative political paradigm has instigated a wave of homophobic attacks, hate, and discrimination. The recent ban on LGBTQ propaganda will likely further complicate the lives of LGBTQ Russians, potentially leading to higher LGBTQ immigration. Those who stay might be forced back into the closet, and the LGBTQ community may have to resort to Soviet-era tactics of relying on caution and discretion for meetings and gatherings. Russia's conservatism has become a geopolitical agenda built on enmity towards the West, as seen in its aggression in Ukraine. Putin has justified Russia's military actions by citing the need to defend the country from degradation caused by the West. The Kremlin's hostility towards the West is intertwined with increasing authoritarianism, manifesting in strengthening repression and limitations of political freedoms. The foreign agent law has become a powerful instrument of repression at the disposal of the Russian government, excluding anyone under foreign influence and whose activities contradict Russia's national interests. Defenders of LGBTQ rights are among the most frequently included on the list of foreign agents, complicating their work and stigmatizing them in the public eye. Putin's conservative authoritarianism has had a heavy impact on the current socio-political climate in the country, facilitating censorship of LGBTQ themes, bans of LGBTQ events, and state-endorsed public homophobia. The Russian authorities have consistently banned pride parades, refused to register LGBTQ organizations, and issued homophobic statements. The Kremlin's conservative political paradigm has instigated a wave of homophobic attacks, hate, and discrimination. The recent ban on LGBTQ propaganda will likely further complicate the lives of LGBTQ Russians, potentially leading to higher LGBTQ immigration. Those who stay might be forced back into the closet, and the LGBTQ community may have to resort to Soviet-era tactics of relying on caution and discretion for meetings and gatherings.
As we reflect on the intricate tapestry of Russia's evolving attitudes towards sex, we find ourselves at the crossroads of tradition and modernity. From the veiled secrecy of the past to the bold expressions of the present, the journey has been one of transformation and resilience. In the vast expanse of Russia's history, the intimate narratives of its people have woven together a rich mosaic of passion, constraint, and liberation. As the nation strides confidently into the future, the whispers of the past linger in the air, reminding us that the evolution of a society's attitudes towards sex is an ongoing narrative, constantly shaped by the interplay of cultural shifts, societal norms, and individual aspirations. The dance between conservatism and progressiveness, modesty and openness, echoes through time, creating a rhythm that encapsulates the essence of the Russian spirit. The shadows of historical taboos may have faded, but the sparks of newfound freedom have illuminated new horizons. In bedrooms across the nation, love, desire, and connection continue to thrive, defying the constraints of any era. As we close this chapter on Russia's intricate sexual history, let us embrace the diversity of human experience and celebrate the resilience of the human spirit. In the realm of intimacy, Russia's past has laid the foundation for a present that beckons toward a future where love knows no boundaries, and the warmth of connection transcends the pages of time. In the grand symphony of life, may Russia's sex life be a harmonious crescendo, echoing through the ages with a melody of love, understanding, and unbridled passion.